My grandchildren are getting ready to go to college. So we're in utterly different parts of our lives. And I think we need to distinguish and not just have this lump called older adults or adults over 50. So what I find is that if I were just talking to a clinician, what you should look for if somebody in their 50s walks into your office and thinks they may have this thing we call ADHD. What should you look for? And one of the things that I would tell you is it's not unusual, sadly, still not unusual to have people in their 50s walk in saying, I'm pretty sure I have it, but I've never been diagnosed. And very often, what leads people to the diagnosis is that a family member, a generation or more younger than they, have been diagnosed, and they go, I was just like that when I was their age, and I'm still dealing with a lot of the issues. So, that being said, what does it look like when you're a middle-aged person? ADHD impacts our ability to regulate almost every aspect of our life. So it has to do with regulating our emotions. That people with ADHD can either be highly irritable and maybe inappropriately angry, low frustration tolerance. And we see that more in men than in women. In women, we see emotional dysregulation, but it often looks like tearful upsets. My feelings have been hurt. I feel so ashamed. I feel misunderstood. I feel unappreciated. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. And so what we see from the youngest age is, of course, there's overlap, but in general, males externalize the disorder. They're loud, they're noisy, argumentative, resistant, oppositional, angry. They make their voices heard. And females from the earliest age tend to internalize everything. I'm sad, I'm shy, I'm lonely, I don't feel good about myself, I wish I were accepted, I'm a mess. We know that the little bit of research that exists, that females with this thing we call ADHD are less accepted. That what society expects us to be as females is very hard for us to achieve as females with ADHD. Whereas by contrast, you may have heard that for the longest time, if a boy was described as possibly having ADHD, the father in the family might say, what are you talking about? He's just all boy, meaning that the symptoms of ADHD were congruent. Boys are supposed to be feisty and get in fights and be aggressive and stand up for themselves. And of course, boys think school is boring because school is boring for boys. And in other words, girls are supposed to be sugar and spice and everything nice. We're supposed to not get upset. We're supposed to do as we're told. And it's much harder, I think, being a female with ADHD for that very reason, because it's not congruent with societal norms, societal expectations. The good news is society is changing. And so when I talk to women in their 50s, 60s, and beyond, I grew up at a time when those norms were in full force. I remember, it sounds ridiculous and Victorian now, but when I was in school, 16, 17 years old, we had to get permission to wear pants. I went to a private school. It had to be cold enough. Otherwise, young ladies wear skirts and dresses. We had a lot more requirements. One of the things that I would say to our listeners is the best way to understand ADHD is how it interfaces with the environment we are living in. And so our ADHD can wax and wane. It can become better. It can become worse depending on the stress level in our lives. If we just had triplets, you better believe our ADHD is going to go through the roof when things calm down. I mean, you'll read that in post-retirement years that ADHD lessens. I don't think it lessens. I think that it looks better because the world is demanding less of us in those years. So it's really the interface between our ability to deal with the stress and demands of our daily life and what our daily life is expecting of us. When you ask me, what does it look like for people in their 50s? One of the things to take into account is that people in their 50s can be in utterly different situations. Some people had their children in their mid to late 30s, and they're still in the thick of raising teenagers who very likely have ADHD themselves. And so they're in a high stress period of their life. They're worrying about, how am I going to pay for college? Another 50-something-year-old might never have had children or might have had children when they were younger. And so they're in a different phase. And maybe the stresses in their life have to do with career demands, because often peak demands in our careers occur in the 50s. You constantly have to look at that interface, that ADHD symptoms go up as demands go up, as stress level goes up. And so it's hard to make vast generalizations because we're each in a unique situation in terms of how much support we have and how much stress we have.
So, are there ways that ADHD impacts health in adults at midlife and older?
ADHD impacts health enormously. And the reason for that is, when we're young, our bodies take care of themselves no matter how badly we treat them. We can get by on less sleep if we have to. We can get by on an unhealthy diet of fast food and junk food and carry out, and a lot of people do. We tend to be more active when we're younger, but it takes a lot of planning and forethought and discipline and organization to lead a healthy lifestyle. It means planning meals and cooking them at home, because it's almost impossible to find truly healthy food. Carry out food has high fat content, high salt content. And so staying healthy as we get older requires intentional exercise, which, as is hard for all of us to build into our life. I have said to many people that it's my dog that's keeping me healthy. I might neglect me, but I'm going to walk my dog twice a day, rain or shine. It's my dog that keeps me out there moving. And so Dr. Russell Barkley announced some very alarming research results not very many years ago. And that is that on average, our life is 8 or 10 years shorter when we have ADHD that's not well addressed and treated. And a big part of that is unhealthy lifestyle, that because we're not cooking healthy home cooked meals, we're not eating lots of fruits and vegetables, we're not exercising, sleep disturbance is endemic to people with ADHD, and not getting good sleep impacts our health too. So we start to have high cholesterol, all of the inflammatory diseases. There is growing research that ADHD is correlated with eventually developing Alzheimer's. That research came out of Sweden. And it's very lifestyle related. I think a lot of people don't realize how lifestyle related dementia is, but some people are referring to Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, meaning that the same lifestyle problems that often result in type 2 diabetes a few years later result in the beginning of dementia. So the health problems are tremendous. People with ADHD often struggle with being overweight, often struggle with not exercising, definitely struggle with dysregulated sleep. I've dealt with that all my life, and I go to great efforts to try to regulate my sleep and to go to sleep on time and get up at the same time and exercise due to my dog. And yet it's still an effort, and I have to make numerous efforts to try to get that.
Now, let's talk about women, especially at midlife, the challenges, the impairments that come with hormonal shifts, especially the hormonal shifts associated with perimenopause and menopause, and the effects that has on a person's ADHD as well as on the rest of their life.
Hormones are such an important issue for females across the lifespan, and we're not paying enough attention to it. And I think one of the reasons we're not is psychiatrists don't know anything about hormones, and gynecologists don't know anything about ADHD. I mean, it just sort of falls in between those two silos. We have siloed medicine. And I'm very excited that in the Netherlands, a few weeks ago, 3 female physicians, one is a psychiatrist, one's a cardiologist, and one's a gynecologist, 3 women got together to form their own nonprofit to really promote cross discipline research in this area. When my longtime friend and writing partner, Patricia Quinn, who is an MD, we've written books together for years, we used to joke, we're talking to the wrong people, because we would talk about the issue of hormones to at a CHAD conference, at another ADHD conference, and all the physicians in the room were psychiatrists. They didn't know anything about hormones. In fact, some of the time they would argue there's absolutely no evidence that hormones impact ADHD. I would like to tell them that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. You guys just haven't looked at it. So, what we do know is that the impact of hormonal fluctuation begins at puberty for girls with ADHD. And so that's one of the reasons why that's a very common age for girls who've done just fine, I'm putting that in quotes, just fine, in elementary school, is they've tried so hard to keep it together, to not get in trouble with their teacher, with their parents through elementary school. And then the double whammy, they hit middle school, suddenly they have a bunch of teachers, a lot of different assignments. There's so much more to keep track of and be organized about, which is hard for ADHD brains. And at the same time, these 4 girls hit puberty and their hormones start fluctuating. And I have wished for years that somebody would track self reported ADHD impact across the menstrual cycle. I think it would be very easy to document that in the premenstrual week that girls, we already know they experience more anxiety, more mood issues that week, but I know that they also experience more ADHD challenges. So that's just the beginning. A while ago, a long while ago, when women were first starting to be diagnosed with ADHD, it was reported that the average age of diagnosis was age 39. Why at age 39? Age 39 is, on average, the beginning of perimenopause. And perimenopause, on average, lasts 10 or 11 years. So menopause, defined as no menstrual period for 12 months, occurs on average at age 50. So you have this whole decade of declining estrogen. And women, even women who have been diagnosed, who have been in treatment, will go to their doctor saying, my medication doesn't seem to be working anymore. It's because of the fluctuating. So, yet another reason why ADHD is more challenging for females. There's a more complicated physiology going on that impacts our brains. Then, when we get to menopause, wham, we are very low on estrogen. There was enormous controversy and I think greatly exaggerated assessment of the dangers of hormone replacement therapy. Interestingly, when all that furor was going on here in the US and women were saying, no, 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 it's very dangerous. I don't want hormone replacement therapy. A survey went out to female physicians in the UK who were age 50 and above. Are you yourself seeking hormone replacement therapy? Almost all of them were. They knew what the risks and benefits were, and they themselves were. So I think we've done ourselves a terrible disservice here in the US that really needs to be addressed. And when they were talking about the benefits of this dangerous hormone replacement therapy, nobody was thinking about emotional or cognitive functioning. Wasn't even on the table. I mean, they were talking about, does it help your heart? And if it doesn't help your heart a great deal, why are you risking the danger of breast cancer? And we now know there certainly are women that, because of their genetics, can't tolerate hormone replacement therapy, that they're more at risk for breast cancer. But the majority of us greatly benefit from it. And yet there's not been enough information available to women about its not only its safety, but its tremendous benefits, especially if you're a woman with ADHD.
So, what are some of the most challenging changes in symptoms that people in general with ADHD might experience as they age?
I wouldn't say there's a huge change in symptoms. We know that people are less likely to be hyperactive as they get older, but that begins earlier in adulthood. There certainly are a few that are hyperactive to the bitter end. I remember when I was doing research on my book, and by the way, my book, Still Distracted After All These Years, has come out. It's been out for several months now. And it is the first and only book for older adults with ADHD. And I had a wonderful time talking to a huge range of people all over the country for the book, half men, half women. And I remember interviewing one man who was in his late 80s. Was a very successful international businessman. And get this, I've never known a woman to be able to arrange this. He and his wife had built this import export business up, hugely successful, worked together in the business. They divorced because she got very tired of taking care of him, as she put it. When he was home at night, they'd work together all day in the office. He and his wife, his ex wife now, still own the business together and still run the business together. And he has remarried the woman who brings him his slippers and his hot tea when he gets home. So he has help at the office and help at home. But this guy, if he's still alive, and I bet he is, he's in his early 90s, and he was very hyperactive and still going strong, but needed a pretty massive support system. Hyperactivity decreases, and what we really are left with is our symptoms are reflective of the situation we find ourselves in. And by that, I mean that I have worked with women who've been divorced in their early 50s, and they are suddenly on their own financially, very ill prepared to be on their own financially. Their stress level is very high. Their quality standard of living has suddenly decreased. And their ADHD symptoms, of course, increase because there is a direct correlation. As stress goes up, ADHD symptoms go up. But by the same token, there are people who are in a stable marriage, whose children have left the nest and they're in their mid 50s and their stress level is going down. So when you talk about ADHD in the last third of life, it depends entirely upon the circumstances that we find ourselves in. I had the wisdom to marry a man who's very good at keeping all the trains running on time. I've always often joked that he has added at least a decade to my life by just saying, do you realize it's bedtime? I will be immersed in whatever I'm immersed in. I had no idea it was bedtime.
Absolutely. But what are the most effective treatments for adults with ADHD in midlife? And what are some ways treatment may change as people get older?
Well, stimulants are beneficial to us at every age and stage in life. Many physicians incorrectly think that as we develop heart problems or other health issues, that stimulants are dangerous and shouldn't be prescribed. And I actually had a psychiatrist at my clinic who just flat out declared, I will not prescribe stimulants to anyone over age 60. But meanwhile, stimulants are commonly used in nursing homes. So it makes no sense. It's really a lack of training. And there's a huge gap. Again, people are falling through in between the medical silos, if you will, because people that have never been diagnosed with ADHD and they're experiencing forgetfulness as they get older think, oh my gosh, is this the beginning of cognitive decline when they've been really forgetful all their lives? They're just now worried about it because of their age. And they go to a memory clinic. Well, memory clinics, they just focus on beginning of dementia. They don't focus on ADHD in late life. They don't know anything about it. In fact, Dr. David Goodman, who is an adult ADHD specialist, he's affiliated with Hopkins, and he did a survey of memory clinics a number of years ago, asking them the simple question, do you screen for adult ADHD when someone comes concerned about memory? And the vast majority of them didn't do that at all, wasn't on their radar. So we have this disorder that falls between a lot of cracks. And sadly, it's the way we practice medicine, that medicine has become so complex that everybody has their own little arena and there's no cross fertilization. I think that's a serious issue.
Absolutely. And do you have some suggestions for ways adults with ADHD can work more, maybe more closely with their healthcare providers in order